In today's video, I'm going to show you the system I use to remember Korean vocabulary long term, not just memorize it for a few days and forget it. Make sure you stay until the end because I'll be sharing 3 strategies for memorizing Korean words that will fit into any schedule. If you've ever felt frustrated with forgetting words you've already studied, this method will completely change how you approach Korean vocabulary. The first time I had an issue with memorization was with Hangeul, the Korean alphabet. I had just moved to Busan and didn't know a single word of Korean. Through rote memorization, I was able to remember most of the letters. However, I kept mixing up the vowels yo and u. Thankfully, after a lot of trial and error, the vowels finally stuck. Later, I realized I was doing it the hard way and I wasted a lot of time. After 15 years of learning and teaching Korean, the team and I developed a system that works not just for me, but for thousands of our students. I'm going to break down this exact system into 10 practical tips you can start using right now. Tip number 1, master Hangeul first. The foundation of all Korean vocabulary learning is Hangeul, the Korean alphabet. You really need the Korean alphabet to memorize words correctly. If you don't know Hangeul, you'll learn words through romanization. This means that you'll spell Korean words using English letters. For example, the Korean word for water is 물. The romanization for 물 is MUL. The thing is, romanization is not entirely accurate for pronunciation. The Korean and English alphabets have a lot of similar sounds, but they're not the same. So if you only know the English alphabet, you're going to be limited when learning the correct way to say Korean words. Let's take a look at the previous example of 물, or water. Its romanization is MUL. Is that pronounced like 물 or 물? If I was going to spell it in English, I would write MOOL. To me, romanization is one of the hardest ways to remember Korean vocabulary. If you don't know Hangeul yet, don't worry. You can actually learn the Korean alphabet in about 90 minutes. I'll cover more on that in a bit. Tip number 2, syllable baby steps. When learning Hangeul, you might be wondering when you would start learning actual words. A good strategy is to review Hangeul until you're about 70% confident with the alphabet. Then, start learning single syllable words along with reviewing the Korean alphabet. Then, when you're about 70% comfortable with the single syllable words, move on to 2 syllable words. Repeat the process for more advanced words. Here's an example. 1 syllable word, jeep. 2 syllable word, 친구. 3 syllable word, 지하철. Tip number 3, flashcard system setup. You're going to need a way to remember the words you're learning. There are lots of choices for this. I personally like Anki because it uses spaced repetition and it's customizable. Spaced repetition means that cards you know well appear less frequently, while cards that are difficult for you will appear more often. You don't necessarily need to use an app. You can also use physical flashcards or index cards if you like them better. Apps are convenient because you can do reviews on your phone, which means you don't have to carry anything extra around with you. I like to set 1 day a week to review my deck and add new words to my flashcards. More on that in a bit. Tip number 4, the screenshot method. Whenever you come across a word that you want to use, look up the word and take a screenshot. The purpose of this is to catch yourself whenever you find a word that might be useful. For example, let's say that you love sweet potatoes. You want to make sure that you ask for them on your next trip to the market. Look up that word in Naver Dictionary at that moment you remember it. The reason why you want to look them up in the dictionary is that some words can have multiple meanings. Look through the meanings and pick the correct Korean word. In this case, sweet potato would be goguma. Screenshot it and save it for later. On your review day, you'll add this to your flashcard deck. Remember how I said earlier that you should set aside 1 day a week to review your flashcards? This is a great time to add new cards to your deck. On your review day, take a look at your screenshots on your phone and add the words to your flashcard deck. Then delete the screenshots so you know you added those words already. You may be wondering how many new words you should be learning each day. I'll give you my formula for that a bit later. Before I go into this next tip, if you're finding this helpful, make sure to hit that like button for more Korean learning tips just like these. Tip number 5, say it out loud. When you're learning new Korean words, it's critical to practice saying them out loud. Here's why. If you only memorize how a word looks, you might know its meaning, but freeze up when you actually need to say it. If you've never practiced saying galbi out loud, you're not going to be confident saying it correctly when you're ordering at a restaurant. It's like training for a sport. You need to put in the practice so you can take action when it counts. This is especially the case for double consonants and more difficult to pronounce vowels. If you wait until you're in a real conversation to try pronouncing words for the first time, you might struggle or pronounce them incorrectly. But if you've already put in the practice reps, saying these words will feel natural when you need them. I like to keep it simple and just say the word when I'm reviewing it. The added bonus is that you're adding another reference point. You're speaking it along with reading it, which makes it easier to remember. Tip number 6, recognize when you're stuck. If you see the same word repeatedly and don't remember it, then that's a sign that you're stuck. Here's my criteria for being stuck on a word. You've seen the same card 4 to 5 times. You keep getting it wrong. You feel frustrated every time it comes up. This is when you're at a sticking point and it's a sign that it's time to do something different. Common sticking points include similar sounding words like 아침 and 점심, abstract concepts, words with multiple meanings, and vocabulary with no English equivalent. When you're stuck on a word, it's a great time to use an association. I'll explain that next. Tip number 7, create associations. When you're stuck on a word, it's time to create associations. Basically, this is linking a word in Korean to something you already know. It can be a picture, story, or both. A simple example of an association is the Korean alphabet. Remember how I said before that you can learn Hangeul in 90 minutes? The way you do it is with associations. Let's say you want to remember the Korean consonant biup. Instead of remembering that biup is a B sound, you can just remember that it looks like a bed. It makes the B sound from the word bed. That's how you use associations. You see the letter biup, you associate it with something you know, bed, and you link them together, B sound. If you don't know Hangeul yet, I'll link a resource for it down below. That's how you make associations for letters. Now, let's move on to associations for words. For this, you'll use a similar principle to linking biup to the B in bed. When you force your brain to create associations, you're linking something you're learning to something you already know. That makes it easier to remember. When creating associations, I recommend starting with nouns before tackling verbs. Nouns are usually easier to visualize and remember. Let me give you a practical example of how this works. Take the Korean word jeep, which means house. This is an easy one to practice as you go about your day. Anytime you pass by a house, just imagine that there's a jeep parked in front of it. Then you know that the word for house in Korean is jeep. There's a jeep parked in front of the jeep. Now, if you're still having trouble with memorization, don't worry. The team and I created a checklist of these Korean word memorization tips with links to resources so you can start using them right away. You can get your free PDF checklist down below. Tip number 8, use context sentences. I find it helpful to add sample sentences along with the words. That way, you can see how the word is used naturally in a sentence. Seeing the whole sentence can also make it easier to remember since you can see the context. When adding new words, I like to include a sample sentence. I use Naver Dictionary for this. Here's how I do it. Look up the word in Naver Dictionary. Find the simplest example sentence. Add both to your flashcards. The added bonus of this method is that you get extra reading practice. Don't worry if you don't know the meaning of the words in the sentence. Just keep practicing. What will happen is that you'll find common words that appear in different sentences, and you'll further reinforce other words through this process. The sentences can be simple at first. Then you can increase the complexity of them as you get more experience. Tip number 9, create your own flashcard decks. While downloading pre-made decks is a fast way to get started, creating your own is much more effective. When you make your own cards, you're processing the information twice. Once when you create the card, and again when you review it. This double exposure helps cement the word in your memory. Additionally, you're making the cards the way you want. Different associations work for different people. Most importantly, you can be sure that they're correct. If you do end up downloading flashcard decks made by someone else, make sure you're getting them from someone you trust. Tip number 10, your daily card system. It's important to have a strategy for how many new words you're learning. You'll also want to adjust this depending on what's happening in your life. Come up with a daily card system that works for you and adjust as needed. I break it down into 3 modes: fast, casual, and maintenance. Fast mode is when you're serious about rapid progress. Add 10 new cards per day plus reviews. Use this when you're extra motivated and want to learn as many words as possible. Casual mode means adding 2 new cards per day plus reviews. This is perfect when you want to make some progress, but don't want to spend a lot of time on reviews. Maintenance mode means no new cards, and just focusing on reviewing existing cards. This is when you're busy or traveling. Remember, maintaining what you've learned is just as important as learning new material. I hope this video helps. I'd like to hear what works for you. How do you remember Korean words that you've learned? Let me know in the comments below.